You wake up, grab your phone, open the GPS, and follow the path it tells you. In the sky above you, more than 35,000 kilometers away, there's a war going on. No gunfire, no bloodshed, but with consequences as lethal as a bomb. And the question no one's asking is, who's winning? And why hasn't anyone told you? On January 7, 2007, China aimed a missile at its own weather satellite. It exploded into thousands of pieces of metal that still orbit Earth to this day. The entire world was shocked. But the message wasn't for the scientific community, it was for the United States. It was a silent warning that if war broke out, it wouldn't start on the ground, It would start in the sky. From that day on, something changed. The space race ceased to be an adventure of conquest. It became a game of survival, and we weren't warned. Have you ever heard of the term space situational awareness? Probably not, but this expression defines those who see everything that happens up there. Secret launches, suspicious movements, unidentified objects that change orbit and mysteriously disappear. But this surveillance isn't carried out by international organizations. It's carried out by the military. It's carried out by governments. It's carried out by companies that answer to no one but their own interests. What orbits above your head today is no longer just technology, it's weaponry, it's espionage, it's war. In 2020, the United States created the Space Force. It's not science fiction. It's an official branch of the US military, with $1 billion budget, secret bases, and a very clear mission to ensure the country remains the master of space. And if you think that sounds exaggerated, stop for a second and consider what's at stake. Satellites control global communication, airplane routes, banking transactions, defense systems, internet access, weather forecasting. If someone shoots down just 3 strategic satellites, half the planet collapses. No one sees, no one hears, no one feels. But up there, in the absolute silence of Earth's orbit, there are spy drones, satellites that follow others, like predators, devices that can blind, hack, or even destroy their targets with a simple command sent from a military bunker. And believe me, they've already been used. Did you know that in 2021, a Russian satellite came dangerously close to another American satellite, like a car tailgating another at 27,000 kilometers per hour? Do you think this is a coincidence? This is a warning, this is provocation, but why is no one talking about this? Why is this war being waged without the population having the right to know? The answer is simple and uncomfortable, because ignorance is useful. While you worry about what you see on the surface, protests, elections, inflation, local crisis, the real power struggles are being drawn up high. And worst of all, they are invisible. You might think this is all just between major powers, but Brazil, for example, has monitoring satellites that help detect fires, monitor deforestation in the Amazon, and track illegal vessels. Now imagine if, in the midst of an international crisis, these satellites are shut down. Who do you think will lose first? The environment, indigenous peoples, agriculture, our sovereignty. Because today, whoever controls space, controls the Earth. There's a fact almost no one knows. More than 90 countries have already launched satellites, but fewer than 10 have the real capability to defend or attack in space. This means that if a war breaks out, most of the planet will be blindfolded, within seconds, literally. What you're seeing here, now, in this video, is just the surface. Behind your phone screen, a satellite network is being manipulated. There are silent attacks being planned. There are acts of sabotage that don't make the news. And there are victims, yes, victims. Companies that lost billions due to a mysterious signal failure. Cities that were left without internet for hours because of an unexplained satellite failure. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever considered that maybe it wasn't an accident? They call it a silent conflict. We call it a warning. Because the next world war may have already begun, and we haven't even noticed. And now that you know this, are you just going to keep looking down? The smokescreen begins in the midst of the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union pretended to be fighting only for the pride of planting flags on the moon. But behind the black and white broadcasts, a dark pact already existed. Whoever dominated the orbit would control not only the narratives of power, but also the backbone of nuclear defense. In 1958, while millions cheered Explorer 1, the Pentagon secretly tested Project Argus, detonating 3 atomic bombs in the upper atmosphere to assess whether an electromagnetic pulse could fry Soviet radars on the other side of the planet. Can you imagine? Nuclear fireworks over the Pacific, launched without most of humanity even having a television at home. Victory in space, from the beginning, has always been measured in silences, radioactive silences, diplomatic silences, silences that never made it into school textbooks. Only 3 years later, Moscow responded with the Orbital Sputnikov, satellites capable of tracking, colliding with, and pulverizing enemy targets at an altitude of 800 kilometers. For every photo of a smiling cosmonaut, there was an underground laboratory calibrating infrared sensors and fragmentation detonators. Then came names that sound alien today: Polyot 1, IS-1, Cosmos 249 rattlesnake ships that slumbered in low orbit and, when activated, accelerated to Mach 8 to tear apart any American all-seeing eye. Ask yourself, how many headlines have you read about this? Almost zero. And not because there's a lack of archives, but because admitting that the sky was a minefield would destroy the myth of peaceful exploration that both blocs sold to the population. Meanwhile, in the West, NASA was showing off Neil Armstrong's tours, but the USAF was hiding Program 437, Thor missiles positioned at Johnston Atoll, ready to lift 1.4 megaton nuclear warheads into the exosphere and vaporize entire constellations of communist satellites. A single blast and countless debris would rain down on orbit, blinding radar, muffling communications, and pushing the adversary back into the Stone Age of information. This is where history reveals its deepest scar. The first weapon of mass destruction designed to never touch the ground. Nightmares designed to kill from a distance, with no visible bodies, no smell of gunpowder, no foxhole photos, just black screens and radio silence. Doesn't that sound more perverse? 1980s, Reagan launches the Strategic Defense Initiative, nicknamed Star Wars. The public saw futuristic lasers. Engineers saw billions of dollars fueling research into chemical mirrors, accelerated beam-X, and umbrella satellites capable of firing tungsten projectiles at 30,000 kilometers per hour. The official objective, intercepting Soviet ballistic missiles. The unspoken objective, having a shotgun pointed at any satellite that dared cross an imaginary line in space. Moscow trembled, but did not back down. It invested in countermeasures ranging from optical camouflage to plasma reflectors. The race spiraled. Each advance generated a shield. Each shield required an even sharper spear. End of the USSR, an illusion of respite. Russia inherited the orbital arsenal and, at the turn of the millennium, tested the Noodle system, a ground-launched anti-satellite missile that reached targets in polar orbit in less than 10 minutes. China, sensing the hegemonic vacuum, accelerated the SC-19, destroyed the Fengyan 1C in 2007, and scattered 150,000 pieces of lethal scrap that now threaten every commercial spacecraft. India, eager not to be left behind, shot down its own microsatar in 2019 and declared, "We are the fourth combat space power." Israel, Iran, North Korea, France, even the United Arab Emirates all are racing to have at least one anti-satellite missile or a jammer capable of distorting GPS coordinates. Welcome to the exclusive club, where the key to entry is proving you can blind your neighbor. And where does Latin America fit into this story? In 1993, Brazil signed the Alcantara Agreement with the US, ceding the most privileged launch site on the planet, but backed out due to internal pressure. 2 decades later, negotiations are back, and now there seems to be a consensus. Without a partnership, our space window closes. While Braslier debates launch royalties, sponsored hackers, scanese yesterday abeyera antennas testing open ports. Why such a rush? Because the Sino-Venezuelan Simon Bolivar satellite was silenced in 2020 by an alleged short circuit. Analysts suspect external interference. If our neighbors can lose orbital sovereignty at the click of a button, what can we say? With an agribusiness dependent on precision imagery. But perhaps the most dangerous blind spot is corporate. When SpaceX launched the first batches of Starlink, no one imagined that, within 5 years, 6,000 mini-satellites would form the communications backbone of Ukraine under Russian attack. A private service, arbitrated by the whims of a billionaire, has become critical wartime infrastructure. What if tomorrow that switch is flipped on a whim? What if another CEO in Shanghai activates a rival swarm to monitor shipping lanes in the South Atlantic? We are outsourcing our freedom of information to companies whose loyalty is bought on stock markets. Who watches these watchmen when we weave together all these threads? Atmospheric detonations, kamikaze satellites, clandestine jammers, private mega-constellations. We understand why war in space was born long before the press coined the term. It has been brewing for 60 years. growing silently, ever closer to the surface. What will it take for it to boil over? A missile fired by mistake, an errant fragment that hits the space station, a teenage hacker who reorients a military satellite's solar panels and leaves half a continent in the dark. The past proves that all the pieces are already in place. And while governments shake hands in front of the cameras, their generals keep their fingers on the orbital trigger, ready to pull without warning. If this is making you rethink everything you knew about space, then just imagine what's to come. This story is just beginning, and the next few moments reveal what no one has dared to show. If you've made it this far, it's because you care. So here's what you do. Subscribe to the channel right now, activate the bell so you don't miss the next episode, leave a like if this content opened your mind, and comment below, did you ever imagine that the war was also above our heads? You're reading this sentence because a satellite allows it. The signal crosses the Atlantic, hits an orbiting repeater, and lands on your screen in milliseconds. Now imagine the minute that link breaks without warning. That's what happened to a cryptocurrency exchange in Seoul 3 months ago. The platform disappeared for 4 hours. Customers tried to withdraw billions. Panic melted values, and when service returned, half the capital had evaporated. The official reason? Telemetry failure on a commercial satellite. The real reason, according to independent analysts, a spoof attack that injected false coordinates, knocking out the link antenna. Money went up in smoke, but it didn't make headlines because admitting orbital sabotage crashes stock markets, undermines maritime insurance, and inflates risk premiums. On global contracts, one could blame China, Russia, North Korea, or just a group of patriotic hackers. In the end, the message is the same. If the orbit bleeds, the economy collapses with it, and there will be no sirens on the ground to warn. On the front line of this dependence is Ukraine, which uses thousands of Starlink terminals to command drones, coordinate armored vehicles, and connect field hospitals. Early morning of July 25, 2025, all terminals go silent for more than 2 hours. The Eastern Front goes silent, UAVs land blindly, planned strikes stall in limbo. SpaceX's official reason was a software glitch, but Ukrainian generals called the episode a global blackout, living proof that a single private control point can make or break an entire war. The previous week had been even darker. Revelations that Elon Musk, fearing nuclear escalation, had ordered Starlink coverage cut over occupied regions as Kiev advanced on Kherson 2 years earlier. It was the first time a civilian had single-handedly shut down a vital part of the battlefield. US lawmakers called for rules against orbital monarchs. Europe talked about creating public constellations. But the stark truth is that today, administrators' command is enough to amputate an entire country's military capability. Beijing is watching and sharpening its blades. Chinese researchers have published reports suggesting lasers embedded in submarines, spy satellites that stick like ticks to the Starlink hole, and even sabotage of the Falcon 9 rocket supply chain. The justification is simple. If Musk's network is an arm of the Pentagon, it's a legitimate military target. Every launch you see on the news is, for Beijing, another enemy piece on the board. Counterattack plans have already been presented to party leaders, fast-climbing missiles, microwave beams, swarms of kamikaze, a race to the bottom, where no one can win without first blinding the very sky that illuminates the planet. Moscow, for its part, is considering something even more radical, detonating warheads in the upper atmosphere to poison entire orbits with radiation, rendering them uninhabitable for decades. Think of it as salting the Earth, except that Earth is now everyone's shared space. Leaked documents from Russian think tanks speak of a synthetic exclusion zone, created to paralyze Western commercial constellations and force peace negotiations. There would be no visible craters or debris, just satellites dying silently, teleservices falling in cascades, planes rerouting blindly, and populations accusing telephone companies while the real enemy toasts in a bunker, while the giants exchange invisible threats. Ordinary people pay the price. Ask Nurse Solange on Mirajo Island, who lost connection in the middle of a remote surgery and watched her patient go into shock until fiber optic backup returned. Or the fishing captain in Atagi who sailed over reefs because his GPS was 90 meters off during interference tests. Or the mother who couldn't send an SOS during an earthquake in Turkey because the emergency satellite was under maintenance. Each story is a reminder that this war, even without bombs, leaves flesh and blood wounded. What about you? Have you ever considered how much of your life depends on a point of light you can barely see in the twilight? Perhaps it's time to view the sky with more suspicion, and ask who holds the trigger before someone else bleeds in silence. Look ahead to 2027 with each takeoff. New swarms enter orbit from the 300 military satellites of the Blackjack program, designed to create a permanent war internet web, to the 290 nodes of the European Iris-2, sold as the old continent's digital shield. All these constellations promise resilience. But what happens when 10 rival networks compete for the same celestial corridor, sending out micro-laser antennas to spy, directional jammers to distort signals, and small orbital drones that attach to the adversary's solar panels like titanium ticks? Experts are already talking about an orbital Wild West. Whoever fires first gains a millisecond advantage, enough time to blind anti-missile radars and banking networks across half the planet. It's no coincidence that the Pentagon requires that each Blackjack satellite be capable of maneuvering independently, changing frequencies, and even sacrificing itself as a projectile, should the constellation need to blow a hole in the enemy network. The lesson is brutal. We are piling gunpowder into the sky in the hope that it never sparks, but sparks are already flying. On average, 2 near misses between satellites occur per week, according to ESA's latest space environment report. A head-on collision is enough to trigger the dreaded Kessler-Lecter domino effect of shrapnel at 28,000 km per hour that would multiply orbital debris until it turns low orbit into a lethal cloud for centuries. In this scenario, launching a new satellite would be like throwing a glass bottle at a working jackhammer. Everything becomes fragments, everything becomes a weapon. Now imagine having to shut down MRI networks, air traffic control towers, agricultural, GPS systems, and oil rigs because there's no longer stable coverage. Governments talk about space cleanup, but few are willing to spend billions to remove junk that doesn't count. Meanwhile, tourism startups promise trips to inflatable hotels that may never receive supplies if the corridor becomes contaminated. We'll sleep under a ceiling of invisible shards, praying that the next orbit won't be our last stop. What if an actor decides to shorten the path? CSIS reports warn. Detonating a warhead in the upper atmosphere about 400 kilometers would generate an electromagnetic pulse capable of burning circuits in orbit and on the ground, blacking out satellites, power grids, and hospitals in a matter of seconds. Moscow and Beijing have tested computer models that simulate a continental blackout without launching a single missile at cities. A single shot over the Pacific would be enough to fry undersea cables and crash the New York Stock Exchanges. In the aftermath of the explosion, ionizing radiation would turn orbit into a microwave oven, panels would melt, batteries would ignite, and astronauts would have minutes to seek shelter. Diplomacy has been trying to ban this scenario since 1967, but the Outer Space Treaty doesn't mention a legal loophole as wide as the void separating our planet from the moon. If the button exists, someone will eventually test it. Danger isn't just from bombs. Chinese researchers propose taking down Starlink with ground-based lasers, grappling satellites that would drag antennas into suicidal orbits, or sabotaging operations in the Falcon 9 rocket supply chain. For Beijing, neutralizing Musk's network means preventing Washington from deploying its own global shield. In response, U.S. generals speak of immortal satellites units capable of cloning their own critical systems into backup nanoprobes, spread like electronic spores through space. The race is reminiscent of old viruses and antiviruses. Each weapon is born with an antidote in development, but the time between them decides who goes blind first. We are facing a cycle of hostile innovation measured in fiscal quarters, not peace treaties, while orbit transforms into a laboratory for accelerated warfare. If profit motives govern space, the battlefield can be shut down at corporate whim. On July 25, 2025, a global glitch rendered Ukrainian troops mute for 2 hours. Drones landed blind, ambulances were left without a map. Days later, new allegations emerged that Musk had already cut service in 2022. Fearing a Russian nuclear reaction during the advance on Kherson, these episodes expose an unprecedented ethical dilemma. To what extent can a tycoon decide the course of a war? In the near future, private networks will link schools, hospitals, and armies in dozens of countries. If the switch's owner changes his mind or receives a better offer, how many lives will be counted down? Who legislates over a space that crosses borders 16 times a day? Perhaps the final question is the most uncomfortable. Are we building saviors or executioners? Every internet for all constellation could become a surveillance grid. Every asteroid, telescope could guide hypersonic missiles. Every scientific station could host hackers disguised as engineers. The UN is still seeking a minimum consensus on norms of responsible behavior. But all it took was a draft mentioning a prohibition of offensive weapons for Russia and the US to veto the text. No treaty, no police, no black box, just the promise that no commander will pull the trigger first. We know this scenario. It was the same with the atom. It was the same with biotechnology. The difference now is that the battle is moving at 8 kilometers per second, with no refugee camps to show on TV, no sirens to wake the city. When war truly breaks out, perhaps the only sign will be silence. Silent cell phones, diverted planes, frozen digital wallets. And then the next question will arise, and down here, who controls the digital war? Look around you right now. LED lights, flickering routers, synchronized traffic lights, card machines beeping in a hypnotic back and forth. All these signals rise and fall through submarine cables and microwave antennas. But the pulse that commands the rhythm comes from satellites. You can't pinpoint in the sky. For decades, space was believed to be a no man's land, a cooperative domain of science. Today, it reveals itself to be a chessboard where the pieces are invisible and the movements are silent. When a general decides to block frequencies, the price of your bread goes up. When a private constellation goes offline, a doctor loses the signal from a pacemaker implanted miles away. War in space doesn't separate battlefronts from rearguards. It permeates the cells of the entire social fabric and turns every citizen hostage to a switch they don't know exists. Here's the paradox. The more dependent we become on the sky, the more blind we become to what's happening up there. Military reports predict that by 2030, more than 40,000 new satellites will orbit Earth, but only a handful of countries will have sensors capable of verifying whether one of them is armed or just broadcasting TV series. The international community, caught up in debates over climate change and carbon taxes, forgets that a viable cloud of debris can nullify green solutions, disrupt weather alerts, and destroy the supply chain for solar panels. While geopolitical titans vie to pull the trigger first, telemedicine companies, digital banks, and remote schools dance on a carpet that can be pulled without a bomb going off. No civilians hear the countdown, but the timer ticks on the panel of some underground command center. Now, imagine the day when a failed state or terrorist consortium acquires orbital cyber warfare capabilities on the black market. There are no customs checks for microwave frequencies, no X-rays for infected firmware inside a CubeSat. The same 3D printer that recreates parts for space stations can manufacture metal shredders the size of a soda can. Launching one of these carrier pigeons costs less than an armored truck. Shooting down a satellite, however, can cost billions in cascading financial losses. Unlike old tactics, there is no foxhole for a child to hide in, no air raid alert that can be activated. The target is global, distributed, present in the pocket of every person carrying a smartphone. When the attack comes, questions about perpetrator or motive will be secondary. The instinct will be to reconnect, at any cost, even if it means accepting. New orbital watchdogs. Some are betting on the diplomatic path. Proposals for zones of space stability, voluntary codes of conduct, mutual inspections via robotic probes. But human history shows that, when the weapon is ready, agreements follow the facts. There's also talk of a space police, a multinational agency with radars and transnational mandates, capable of instant economic sanctions. Who funds it? Who gives the orders? Who watches the watchers? In practice, each power prefers to build its own shield, believing that the willingness to retaliate is the true deterrent. Meanwhile, civil society remains on the sidelines, watching the arms race, like fireworks from afar, beautiful but seemingly harmless. When the spectacle turns into a metal storm, there will be no cotton candy stand to hide behind, and then comes the point where the narrator falls silent, so you can hear your own heartbeat. Each beat marks an online transaction, a GPS signal, a weather image, a bank transfer. If the rhythm breaks, it won't be from a thunderous missile, but from the whisper of malicious code or the silent collision of two satellites in the void. We carry life on an infrastructure that could disappear before the next sun, and what are we doing to prevent it? We still fight for likes, fragment debate into hashtags, delegate vital decisions to companies that sell dreams in monthly subscriptions. It may be too late to prevent the sky from becoming a battlefront, but there's still time to demand transparency, collect data, vote for those who understand the risk, teach our children that a bright spot in the sky can be a messenger of life or a silent predator. And when all seems safe again, Remember this burning question, and down here, who controls the digital war?